Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement, actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Dr. David Beaumont, positive medicine genius. I am really looking forward to this episode for the reason that it is pretty rare to come across an MD that really is focused on transforming medicine in the way that you are. And the thing that I loved so much when our head of community, Alex, introduced us was she said to me, David is interested in bringing healing into medicine. And I think that that is so fantastic. And I think our audience are really going to eat everything up that you have to say on this subject. But I always like to ask our guests, if you were to summarize your mission, in a sentence or two, what would that be? The big mission.
The big mission is to turn medicine and healthcare around and stop it being about detecting negatives and trying to treat them, and instead focusing on the positives and actually building positive health, which is why it's called positive medicine. And I would much rather that people didn't get diseased in the first instance. But you're absolutely right. What I've realized is that the model of positive medicine not only is a preventative model, but it's a healing model as well. All the way to healing from chronic disease, whether it be physical or mental health.
I mean, healing, I'm sure, is a word that really takes many of the doctors that you're working with off guard, right? And it's no secret that you're considered a bit of a rebel in the space, which personally I love. I'm also a maverick. But just share with us, how has that generally been received when you bring this idea of healing, that healing is possible and we should be focusing on the healing journey into the traditional medicine space? What kind of reactions do you get?
Well, better than I used to, put it that way. I was speaking at an international conference probably 10 years ago now, and I was new to public speaking those days, and about halfway through, a hand shot up at the back. And I wasn't expecting it, but I thought, well, maybe it will help. So I took the question. And this audience member, who turned out to be a female GP, said, would you mind summarizing the point you're making and finish off the rest of the talk? This is a complete waste of my time.
Wow. How long ago was that?
10 years ago.
Okay.
And I died, and I did exactly what she said and sat down. I wouldn't do it now. And in fact, it's not the reception I'm getting now. So I presented to a group of 50 doctors from the Royal Australasian College of Physicians in Adelaide just before Christmas. And I, at the end of the presentation, it was a workshop on their own health, applying positive medicine in their lives. But I took them all the way to healing from chronic disease, including cases of healing from terminal cancer, for instance. And at the end of the session, I asked them for their honest feedback. I said, gut reactions, you're going nowhere until you've written down. If this is a load of baloney, tell me. And they wrote reams, and this was gold. And I could divide that feedback into thirds. And one of them was extreme. One of them said, sounds like miracles and quackery to me, which was fine. 1 out of 50 is okay. A third said, yeah, not for me.
Mm-hmm.
A third said, I'm interested, but I'd need to know more. And a third said, I want to apply this in my life. This has to be the way we take medicine.
Amazing.
Specialist doctors of all breeds, gastroenterologists, cardiologists, rheumatologists, palliative care physicians, occupational physicians like myself. To me, a third of them to say this is what we've got to do was massive.
Huge. Congratulations. I think that's definitely no mean feat, right? It takes a certain kind of character to pioneer a new conversation, especially when you have something like medicine, which is, really ingrained. The way that the doctors are taught to work, the way that patients are used to experiencing, the conversation with their doctors and their specialists. That's a huge amount of innovation. And I'm curious, when did these questions start to arise in your thinking as a doctor? Was this something that you were thinking all the way through med school? Were you always a bit different in that way, or did it sort of start to illuminate when you were working in practice and you could see that there were maybe missing pieces of the puzzle?
Great question, Nick. Great question. No, I was a very traditional med student. Went straight from school, straight to medical school, straight into general practice, actually, after my junior doctor years. I was a very traditional doctor, very traditional GP. But I got interested in what's known as occupational medicine, the health of workers, and I became an occupational physician. I left general practice in 2000. And suddenly realized that medicine can be different. So working with some of New Zealand's major employers, or back in the day when it was UK's major employers, I realized that my job was actually to keep them healthy and to help them recover from
Preventative.
Well, and if they had a
performance.
Performance, it was helping them to achieve their full potential. Very, very different from what I'd been doing in general practice, which was finding what the disease was, what to explain their symptoms, and prescribing to treat it. Hey, if that works, it's fantastic. And when I went to med school, the expectation I was given was that my role was to detect and cure disease. And I went to med school in the era of Nixon's war on cancer. Hundreds of millions pumped into research in cancer because the cure for cancer was about 5 years away. That was 50 years ago. Nothing has changed. 1961, Nixon announced the war on cancer. 60 years ago, for goodness sake. I was taught that medical science was going to cure chronic disease. And that was the way I was taught. And that was the way that even generations of doctors after me were taught. Med school training is changing. The curriculum is changing. But even now, it doesn't really extend to healing. But it's happening. And it's uncomfortable for doctors because it's happening.
Sure.
There is that resistance. So my job's to help them accept that this is where we're at and that this is what people want and bring them on the journey with me.
The steward. I like it. I want to come back to this idea of the war on cancer in just a little bit. But whilst you're sort of sharing a bit of the timeline and your story with us, so as you moved into this space and you're working with, I'm assuming, kind of leaders, higher performers, people that wanted optimization, not just prescription, are there particular stories that you remember that really supported the solidification of your thinking over those years?
Can I answer it slightly differently?
Of course.
And take you to the realization I had when I started out in occupational medicine, that I realized that the definition of health that I'd been trained to didn't work in a workplace setting, the role that I was having, because the definition of health that I'd understood was that health is the absence of disease. My job, take on disease.
Double negative.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's
You're,
right.
you're going for a double positive these days. I like it.
I actually discovered that there'd been a lot of work done on the definition of health, and
yet there's no consensus, right? Which I always think is very fascinating.
yeah, except there really is. I mean, there was a massive international conference on this in 2010, and it was public. A definition was published in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, in 2011, which is that health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of life's challenges.
Mm-hmm. What's a more progressive definition? Okay. Yeah.
So suddenly we're seeing a whole different way of viewing health. But that also allows us to redefine what disease is as well. So I then started to think, well, okay, if the way I've been taught is wrong, and the whole healthcare system is designed around what doctors do, and this preconception, this misconception that doctors fix patients, which also opens doctors up to blame when patients don't recover. So what does the model of medical practice, that positive medicine, that would create positive medicine, what does that look like? And that came to me as an epiphany, actually, on a plane journey from Sydney in 2013.
Okay.
And since that time, I've been applying this model in my own practice. And that's where I've experienced people going on the healing journey. And my job has been to accompany them on that journey. And yeah, absolutely. There's been some amazing stories of recovery and healing on all sorts of different levels through that process.
In applying some of these principles with your clients, have you ever seen something, say, as extreme as a full remission?
I think probably the most dramatic case that I've experienced was actually, I've got two examples that immediately come to mind. One of them is myself, and I'm just going to give my own.
Please. We love hearing personal stories. We'd love you to share.
So about 10 years ago now, I was diagnosed by my GP with pre-diabetes. My blood sugar had crept up to the point that it was no longer in the normal range, wasn't quite diabetic, but it was pre-diabetic. And he said, we'll have to monitor that. And for the last 10 years, my blood sugars have just gradually crept up until the start of last year, when my doctor said, right, it's gone from 40 to 47. Once it hits 50, you're diabetic. We'll have to monitor that. And I thought, oh my goodness, we've spent 10 years monitoring my blood sugars, waiting for me to become diabetic so that I can
waiting for the sickness.
Yeah, so I can go on metformin. Whoopee. And I just, it's not good enough. And I started doing researching for myself and realized that around the world, there are doctors who are now taking patients with diabetes and pre-diabetes and reversing it. So I consulted a GP who's now specialized in reversing diabetes and other diseases, Dr. Glenn Davis, and I saw him. He was GP of the year in 2022 for his work reversing type 2 diabetes. And he said, you need to go on a keto diet. We need to dramatically reduce your carbohydrate intake, put you on a keto diet.
Stabilize your glucose levels,
Yeah. And in 3 weeks, I have reversed my pre-diabetes that I'd had monitored for 10 years.
Well, of course, get rid of all the insulin spikes. I mean, it really is common sense, isn't it?
I mean, the underlying condition below behind prediabetes and type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So much glucose swooshing around our systems that we just become resistant to all of the insulin in the system.
One of the things on that, that just blew my mind, in a recent presentation I actually was sitting in at an event that I was emceeing, actually a health event in Colorado, was this amazing doctor speaking on the metabolic health of America. And the statistic was 97% of Americans are metabolically impaired in some way. So only 3% are actually metabolically healthy. That is unbelievable. Like, I knew it was bad, but that is just completely unbelievable.
And I've never heard that statistic, and it's horrifying and sadly not surprising.
Yeah.
In fact, it's interesting that I use the word sadly there. They're all, the diet they're on is SAD.
It is.
SAD, S-A-D, the standard American.
Yes, diet. That's it.
Yeah. And it's so high in processed food and carbohydrates. We don't have to look far back in our evolutionary past to realize that we're just not designed for it.
No, we never ate processed. I mean, even my grandparents, as a 31-year-old, and even probably my parents for their childhood, weren't eating processed foods.
No.
It's a completely new profit-driven phenomena in our world.
It is. So type 2 diabetes is definitely about choices and personal choices. But above and beyond all of that, it's actually a societal disease.
It is.
Creating the environment where the standard American diet and its equivalent in every other country in the Western world is being endorsed by our governments.
Mm-hmm.
And we do need to resist it. We do need to say it needs to be different. And it's not actually rocket science, and it shouldn't be hard. Yeah.
We're also dealing with kind of so many layers of addiction and dependency as well. And, it's a really big conversation. And I know that we could probably go down that rabbit hole for the rest of the podcast. And I know our audience are all very passionate about these ideas. Where did the food pyramid come from? How much of a say has marketing had in the success of many of these processed brands and foods? Maybe a sequel, but to go back to your story, in jumping into the keto lifestyle, in stabilizing some of your insulin resistance, 3 weeks your markers were down, and then what started to happen as you hit kind of the 6-month, 12-month, 2-year mark through that journey?
Great question, Nicole. Great question. So let's just use some figures here. So HbA1c is the marker for diabetic control. When you hit 40, you're at pre-diabetes. When you hit 50, you're diabetic. So mine dropped from 50 to 40 in 3 weeks. After 6 months, it was 34.
Yeah.
Just completely normal.
Mm-hmm.
But what I experienced going on the keto diet, well, first of all, I experienced 2 weeks of keto flu, which was bloody awful. Then suddenly something switched and my body learnt to metabolize ketones.
Yeah.
Now, I was taught that the brain can only use glucose as a source of. What nonsense that. My brain loves ketones.
Yeah.
So what I found was that my brain, my thought processes became sharp. But the most staggering thing of all is that I stopped being hungry. I stopped experiencing hungry because if I wasn't eating, then I had plenty fat stores that I could burn instead, converting to ketones and burn.
Yeah.
So then I tried intermittent fasting, and kind of finished up at the point where I'm now most of the time on OMAD. Have you come across OMAD?
What is the acronym?
OMAD, 1 meal a day.
Okay, right. Yeah.
I just eat one meal at 6 o'clock in the evening. And the next day, there's just a little bit of hunger in the morning. By lunchtime, there's a little bit of hunger. And then mid-afternoon, there's a little bit of hunger. But I don't snack. And so much snacking that we do is habitual as well. Again, parents and our grandparents didn't snack. They had 3 square meals. But even the old slogan, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, we now realize was actually invented by the cereal companies as a market.
Of course. Let's just consume, huge amounts of processed sugar in the morning, and that's a breakfast of champions. It's really wild, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then an hour and a half later be hungry and have a mid-morning snack.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, but I'm so happy to hear that you've found your groove, the thing that really works for you. And again, like, it's a big conversation, I think so much, so many different challenges that so many people are dealing with, inflammation being one of them, inflammation to the brain, inflammation in the gut and throughout the body, the way that really almost this undertone is affecting people's quality of life. It's affecting their ability to make decisions, to be emotionally stable, to just feel optimal and good. Comes back to these really large fluctuations in insulin throughout their day. And we're not taught how to really manage that, with diet, which is the thing that really should make the most sense. It's crazy that doctors don't even really learn much about nutrition through their studies.
The international guidelines on the management of diabetes are so far behind the science.
Yeah.
I mean, the NICE guidelines, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence.
What an acronym.
The advice in that, the last time I checked was probably 12 months ago, but the advice was for diabetic patients to have a healthy diet. Advise your diabetic patients to have a healthy diet. Full stop. Didn't say what it was, and it definitely didn't.
Let's define that.
And you're right. Inflammation is the killer. So many people live in a low-grade chronic inflammatory state.
Nice.
Combination of diet and
Stress.
chronic low-grade stress that our modern lives lead us to. We're
That's
in
it.
constant low-grade fight or flight sympathetic state.
Yeah, it's really, I was just on a holiday over the Christmas break with some friends, and one of the gimmicks my friends seem to love doing is, now that we're developing biotechnology, is doing, their own scans and seeing, what's their heart rate variability, how parasympathetic are they, how sympathetic are they. And so often, when friends are doing this for the first time and they see, wow, like, I have a really low heart rate variability, my nervous system's under stress. And these are people that are otherwise like very conscious, very aware, but it's just not part of that health conversation. So people, I think, arguably, they've never really felt optimal. They've never felt what good feels like. They've never felt, wow, like I'm so blessed to do things like the Global Affair and have conversations with people like you, and have had kind of amazing coaches and an R&D team that's building a lot of this evidence-based models for our technology. And I've got myself to a point where I have a really resilient nervous system. I know what it feels like, to feel good. My insulin levels are balanced throughout the whole day. And I know that my ability to perform and to deliver output 10x's just your average person. And it's not a matter of intelligence. It's not even really a matter of motivation. It's a matter of just having your physiology in an optimal state, and a lot of people have never been taught how to do that.
And do you know what? If they do experience it, because it's so unknown to them, it feels uncomfortable. they resist feeling good. We don't change. We get addicted to stress. We get addicted to that stress state, that sympathetic state. But again, we've only got to look into our evolutionary past. We weren't designed to be in an arousal state 80% of the time, resting state 20% of the time. We were designed to be the other way around. We were designed to react to danger, get ourselves out of danger, run from that saber-toothed tiger, and then rest, recover, procreate, reproduce.
That's right.
Yeah, and act as a community and act as a tribe and support each other. So I'm with you all the way, and I think absolutely wearables, heart rate variability, and monitoring when we're in a parasympathetic state.
That's right. What's helping us achieve that in our lives?
Yeah, exactly. And knowing what does it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Meditation isn't going to work for everyone, and neither does it need to, because there are so many other ways to increase your vagal tone.
Right. Well, I think, even the definition, and this is the challenge with kind of, class typing and stereotyping, that everyone thinks that meditation is sitting down and practicing like TM or visualization, but the meditative state can be achieved in many ways. Sometimes I'm in a meditative state going for a walk. But again, it's getting to the core of what these things really mean, what it means to be physiologically and emotionally resilient, what it means to be able to be in a meditative state, i.e. in a calm, relaxed, but alert state. It's a parasympathetic state. Arguably, everybody should achieve that before they start their working day, and everyone should be able to return to that state, an hour or so before they go to sleep. It's just the basics, really. But yeah, for so many, it's not known, and when it is known, it's not practiced.
Back to the model of positive medicine, because this segues nicely. So I talk about the 4 pillars of health: physical health, psychological health, emotional health, our relationships, and spiritual health. What we've done is a lot of work on universalizing spiritual health, making it accessible and accessible to everyone.
So how do you define this?
Yeah, spiritual health is the health of the spirit. It's the health of the essence of who we are. Actually about connection to self, to others, to nature and the land, and the potential of something beyond, that potential of some kind of organizing force within the universe. But most of all, it's about what brings meaning and purpose to life.
Beautiful.
And we now hearing that there is a crisis in meaning and purpose in Western civilization. We've lost our purpose. People get to the end of their lives and they look around and go, well, was that it? Is that what it's all about?
It's my worst fear, David.
Well, it's not going to happen.
No, I know for me it won't, but it really is my worst fear.
But it is sadness, isn't it? That people. So in my assessments, when I'm undertaking an assessment of a client, I always ask them about their spiritual health. I ask them about. I ask them what brings meaning and purpose in life to them. What's your purpose? Why are you here? And the commonest answer to that question is actually, that's a really good question. I haven't given it much thought. Now, how sad is that?
Yeah.
And so, but actually, do you know what? What I do then is pause and let them think. And they always come back and say, yeah, you know what? Actually doesn't take them long before they can start to think about it. Yeah. So what I'm doing is actually helping people find the answers within. This is where the true answers lie. And this is why that meditative state, that parasympathetic state, even when you're just out walking in nature, just allows the space for those connections to occur. And the connection, as far as I'm concerned, is a connection with our true self.
Mm.
Self that lies beneath the layers of ego defenses that we develop all the way from childhood.
That's it. My personal favorite definition of spiritual is just non-physical, non-material. And when you think about that in the context of our lives, if materialism is all that there is, if that's the worldview that you adopt, that all you see is all there ever will be, what happens when you find yourself in a difficult moment in life? So we need something to help us transcend beyond the material in those moments, especially when life gets hard, arguably. So to have a doctor that's facilitating those conversations, especially when you think about, a health crisis, that really often is when people will have the greatest kind of experience of existential awakening, right? Because they've got to believe that the impossible is possible.
Yeah. So as I take people through my programs, one of the experiences that people have is that they get insights, they get aha moments, they get epiphanies, and they go, oh my goodness, I'd not realized. And things do come to them that they're triggered into having these revelations about what does bring meaning to them. And I also quite often share a suggested purpose, overarching purpose for why we're here. And I suggest that maybe why we're here is to experience life joyfully and help others experience life joyfully. And if that's all there is, then do you know what? That's actually good enough. I mean, when do we enjoy life? We enjoy life now. We can have memories about when we enjoyed life, or we can look forward to things in the future, but we actually can only ever really enjoy life in the present moment. So the whole concept of the power of now and living life in the present moment is so important, because we spend so much of our time in the past or the future that so many people forget to enjoy the present moment.
Such an aligned perspective, and beyond just the enjoyment of the present moment, just the capacity to actually be present, I think, is such a fundamental ability when it comes to self-inquiry, when it comes to going that little bit deeper in understanding, what you need, going back to that definition, the 2011 definition of health, to be adaptive. That's actually about being agile, flexible, responsive to life, not in this state of defense and stuckness. And opening ourselves to actually be present to life, I believe, is the most important aspect of health as it's defined in that way.
And actually, the other connection that I mentioned was connection to others. And that's connection in the deepest sense, the connection that only occurs in the present moment, the connection that you and I are having right now. Our attention is completely focused on the here and now, on this discussion. We're nowhere else. You have my full attention and I have yours. That's a deep connection. One that Stephen Porges talks about in his polyvagal theory. And I think it's helpful just to go back to the sympathetic and the parasympathetic parts of the autonomic nervous system. We traditionally think of parasympathetic, sympathetic as being the two states. But Stephen Porges introduced a third state, which is part of the parasympathetic, which he called social engagement.
Beautiful.
When we're in a parasympathetic state and feeling safe, then the vagus nerve innervates our facial muscles as well. And we become completely attentive to the other person. We got visual clues that says, I'm really enjoying this. I want to hear what you've got to say. I want more of this. And I mean, to be honest with you, I think the term social engagement understates the power of what's happening in that kind of connection, because it's connection of souls. It's connection on a true self level. But you only get that in the present moment, and you only parasympathetic state.
I love that. I think that's a really beautiful distinction. So when you're taking on a client and you're onboarding them and assessing them in this way, what then is the process to get them focused on the healing journey rather than looking at the symptoms, diagnosing, prescribing? How does that traditional model shift inside the journey they take with you as a doctor?
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So first thing I do is to apply my skills as a doctor and the skill of analysis, the logical left brain thinking that analyzes their 4 pillars of health. So I go through with them, and now our programs do this. So people can do this in a self-guided way through our programs. And we analyze where they're at in each of those 4 pillars. But this is where the magic happens once we've done that. After we do that, then I apply the right brain process of synthesis that comes from systems thinking. And it's the synthesis is the magic, because when you bring together the components of the 4 parts that make up our health, the sum of those parts is a whole that is sorry, I'll say that again. The whole is
tongue twister.
the sum of parts. That's what I was trying to say. So this is where, and there's nothing wrong with medicine, and all I'm doing is adding to medicine, but the adding bit is the synthesis, is the systems thinking. So, and I'm going to go somewhere else as well. I'm going to say that if we look at that definition of health that says health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of changing life circumstances, what I realized is that that's incredibly similar to the definition of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the body's incredible ability to maintain stability in the face of changing circumstances. Stability of blood pressure, stability of temperature, even stability of blood sugar. Our blood sugar hovers between 4 and 7 under normal circumstances, unless our body becomes overwhelmed with sugar and carbohydrate, and then it drifts up and we lose control, we lose homeostasis. So suddenly we can have a definition that says health is homeostasis and disease is disrupted homeostasis. Healing becomes creating the circumstances to reestablish homeostasis. That's all I did when I went on a keto diet. I just reestablished homeostasis, and bang, my prediabetes went in 3 weeks.
I love it so much. Obviously, as a team, the Love Out Loud team focuses on emotional health, and our whole key belief is emotional balance is the most effective strategy to effective decision making. And it comes back to this state of balance. Like when you're in a true state of equanimity, balance, homeostasis, this is where the clarity can come. You know, the storm settles and you're able to see and act from a place of total clarity, which is where that ability to be adaptive really comes from. And this leads me to a question that I was ruminating on from your reflections on the introduction of the idea of the war of cancer. So much of what I've learned about health in my own personal health journey and in having conversations like this, namely interviewing Chad Van Eggs, who's an incredible man who's working through stage 4 cancer at the moment. These similar perspectives around healing being that fighting against this whole idea of fighting against a disease, fighting against cancer, fighting against diabetes actually is counterintuitive. And the wisdom I learned in healing from a really chronic eating disorder, and Chad was reflecting on similar things with cancer, is actually looking at the disease or the illness and actually saying, what is this trying to teach me? What wisdom does this have? And actually, rather than fighting against it, embracing it until a point that there's a level of acceptance which stimulates a greater sense of agency. So rather than having a cancer diagnosis, believing that you're sick and then acting like a sick person, getting a cancer diagnosis and training yourself to be able to feel and think like a healthy person and embrace the cancer as a messenger for you, which is such a different approach. And I'm just curious to hear your personal reflections on this.
Did you say we've got another 3 hours now?
No, we've got about 5 minutes. So let's see how far we can get.
We need it. Right. Number one, Nick, I heard that podcast with Chad and it was amazing.
Mm.
And I do want to talk about cancer. I do want to talk about terminal cancer, and I want to talk about healing from terminal cancer, because people do. And that's often despite what doctors do or say, but quite often as well as. And I'm not advocating that, I'm not advocating away from modern medicine, but I'm saying there is so much more we can do on top of modern medicine.
Mm-hmm.
That is the sense of agency. That is the taking control of our own health.
Yeah.
Questions that I ask people with chronic disease, including cancer, is, where did this come from?
Mm.
And they can usually tell me.
Why is it here?
Quite often, childhood trauma. And of course, exactly what Gabor Mate says as well. He says that all chronic disease comes from trauma of one kind or another. Big T trauma or little t trauma, but we're all exposed to trauma.
Okay.
And some people can tell me exactly where their chronic disease has come from.
Mm.
We need to stop thinking about cancer as being a thing that we get. It isn't. And we shouldn't fight against it. You're absolutely right.
Mm.
We should love our cancer because our cancer is coming from ourselves. Rather than having cancer, we should think of it in terms of our bodies cancering.
Mm.
Your body and my body are producing cancer cells all the time. Our homeostatic immune system mechanisms mop them up incredibly efficiently.
Yeah.
Disease is disrupted homeostasis. Cancer is disrupted homeostasis of the immune system and the metabolic system.
Yeah.
Root of all cancers is also metabolic dysfunction in the mitochondria.
Mm.
We start thinking of it in those terms and start enhancing our immune system and enhancing our metabolic system. And one of the treatments for cancer now is to starve the cancer, because cancer.
Yeah, long-term water fasting.
Yeah, or even just, again, keto diet, just to cut down glucose.
Right.
Yeah. So lots of things we could talk about with cancer, but let's open up the possibility of healing in one level or another from cancer. It's their possibility, because people do.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's sort of like the 4-minute mile when before Roger Bannister did it, and no one believed it was possible. And as soon as it was done,
they thought he would die if he actually quick 4 minutes. Right.
Yeah.
So within 6 weeks, a dozen people have done it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I really do see a landscape for health that's coming maybe faster than even the most enthusiastic people believe, that becomes highly predictive and very preventative. And I really think that one day, whether that's in 5 years or 50 years, we're going to look back and see all highly invasive interventions just the same way we look at old world dentistry or lobotomies. And to think about it like that the future generations are going to look back and think, wow, like we did all of these crazy barbaric interventions because they have different ways that create far less impact and trauma on the person. I think that's a very exciting vision to hold, and I know you're such an important voice, David, in that journey. So I just, on behalf of the whole Love Out Loud community, I want to thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Nick. And you're right. This isn't 10 years away. This is at most 5 years away. We're at the tipping point. We're at the tipping point of the paradigm shift. The crisis is upon us. The solutions are here. It's just that we need to get the messages out there. So, and thank you for everything you're doing to get the message out there.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, it's my absolute dream to be spending my days having conversations like this. So, David, for those that want to learn more about positive medicine, we're going to put everything, all the links in the show notes. But is there any special plug where they can find you as soon as they listen to this episode?
Yeah, positivemedicine.com.
Perfect. And can anyone follow you, maybe on socials?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I love engaging with my LinkedIn connections. So yeah, I'm just David Beaumont on LinkedIn, and they'll very quickly find me.
Perfect. And encouraging anyone that got kind of a aha moment, a key takeaway to do that. Go and let David know how our conversation today has impacted you. It's always a nice thing to receive. So yeah, encouraging anyone in the Love Out Loud community, go and do that. But David, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Loved it. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Likewise.